I can remember, there was this sense of bewilderment with people looking at our family and just seeing all of us lined up in red dresses, out at wherever. And
everybody makes their own decisions and everybody makes their own choices, but they're not the only ones that suffer the consequences.
But now, Jill and her husband Derek Dillard say that wholesome veneer masked a damaging culture of control.
Even if you're an adult, even if you've been an adult for a long time, you're married with kids, if your parents don't give their blessing, then you're not honoring them.
My parents didn't believe in magic. They didn't believe in dancing either. But they understood the power of music, and like all magicians, they knew exactly when to wield it. Welcome down the rabbit hole, friends. We're here this morning to get into the down and dirty of Chapter 1 of Counting the Cost by Jill Duggar Dillard. This chapter is entitled Sweet Jilly Muffin, and it's a lot about control within the family, but also about Jill's deep love and respect for her parents growing up. And that really shines through in this chapter especially. But along with that comes a deep need, even a hunt, as Jill calls it, for their approval, love, and recognition.
If parents don't give their blessing, then you're not honoring them.
And the family becoming embroiled in scandal.
What's it like to know that your parents were protecting your abuser?
The couple now discussing what they say cameras didn't capture in their book, Counting the Cost.
Jill starts chapter 1 with an example of obedience like I've never seen or heard of before, or like very few times in my life have I seen anything like this. She lets us know that her mother, Michelle Duggar, had complete control over most of the kids, at least the older ones, as she was growing up. And she uses the example of her mom being able to wield control over their tape player and every once in a while turn on some hymns for them to listen to because, of course, as we all know, they weren't able to listen to any kind of secular music, nothing that was on the radio, nothing that was on TV. And so they had tapes of hymns that she would place into the cassette player when she felt it was necessary. Jill says that when they heard that click of the cassette being pressed in, we would, quote unquote, zip our mouths, lock our feet on the ground, and our eyes on mom. We would be in her complete control because she would bring out this old-time church music when it was needed most, when the kids needed to be corralled, when it was time to express a little bit of joy or get some of the wiggles out for some of the younger kids. But of course, if there was ever a moment that anyone started shaking their body in an inappropriate way, click, the music would go right back off. Look, one of my younger siblings would say quietly to another little Duggar, I'm dancing. Silence. As Michelle turned off the music. Hey guys, listen, Mom would say, her sweetest smile back once more. We don't dance, remember? We want to be careful how we move our bodies so we don't draw attention to the wrong areas. It's okay to jump for joy when we are excited, but we don't dance.
All of our children, not just our girls, but boys and girls alike, our goal is to draw attention to our countenance, to our face, and that helps us to decide what things we wear and what things are modest and appropriate.
A lot of things were restricted in the Duggar home for all of the children. And Jill says they ended up spending an awful lot of time outside in the wholesome northwestern Arkansas air. And Jill says she spent a lot of that time on the hunt, but not with a gun or laying traps. She says instead, it was approval that I was searching for. And by the time I was old enough to balance a baby on my hip while I folded laundry, which I'm guessing was sometime between the age of 7 or 8. I was hands down the best approval hunter in the whole Duggar family. We all remember this, right? When 19 Kids and Counting really took off, none of us who were just watching the show would ever have thought that Jill Duggar would be the one to go out in the world, to break away from her family even just a little bit, to speak out and be a major leader, to emerge from the Duggars. She was the child who seemed to be running it all, always going along with her parents, wanting to please everyone around her. She was a good girl. And that's something that Jill addresses here in this chapter, letting us know that it meant a lot to her. It actually meant everything to be the good girl of the Duggar family. Her parents would even often point it out, like if the younger children were having a hard time, look at Jill, her dad would say. See how she's sitting? See what she's doing? Just look at her and you'll see the example of how we need you to behave right now. And Jill lets us know that from a very young age, she looked up to her mom and dad. She found them to be loving, self-sacrificing, and she had so much respect and admiration for both of them. She wants us to know that her memories of her father and mother growing up are of them working incredibly hard. They didn't have a lot of money, and her dad was just trying to build some kind of life for their family. She describes him as a Christian man at work. He was honest and upstanding. He was the head of our household, and that was the way it was supposed to be. And Jill was ecstatic when they implemented the buddy system because she got to take care of younger kids, which she loved to do, and she happily looked after Joy and James, and eventually I think Jenny as well, and she was so happy to have that role. She felt that it really encompassed what she wanted to be, which was a teacher to the younger children in the family. And her mom was the perfect example of how to be a great caretaker, in Jill's eyes anyway. And she has really wonderful and positive memories of that time growing up before the cameras and the film crew were ever involved. She felt that her parents were encouraging and kind, and they always made an extra effort to take time for the kids. And I have to say, as a parent myself to young children, I'm really amazed with some of the examples that Jill gives in this book, especially considering that her parents were not getting a lot of sleep. Like, I find myself to be quite irritable a lot of the time. They weren't getting a lot of sleep. They had a lot of kids. They were struggling financially. So I'm surprised by how many times she states that her parents would just sit down and take the time to talk to each individual child about some concern that they had. And we really see Jill trying to convey to the reader that her parents back then appeared to her as just like very kind and loving and upstanding people, and they worked hard for the family they had. But in the background was an undercurrent of the Duggar family being quite different from those around them. It's here that Jill talks again about going out in public, going to a beach, and having like really enjoyed getting into the water, but they were wearing like their ankle-length skirts, and people were looking at them, and even a child came up to Jill and asked her why she was wearing a dress in the water, and Jill didn't know what to say. Her parents made it like, this is an opportunity to show our lives to other people and showing them how true conservative Christians should live. There is also an undercurrent of obedience and training that's happening within the household. For example, her parents are really taking the time to even act out with the kids how they expect them to respond when people come up to them and ask them certain questions about their faith and why they're doing what they're doing. The parents will role play with the young children, like, what should you say and how should you say it, in order to come off as the best possible Christian. And Jill said throughout the house, their voices would sing song in unison. Others may, we may not. So to say, like, you may see someone doing something, we're not supposed to judge them, but even though we don't judge their actions, we may not participate in that action. Jill describes her mom, Michelle, as very nurturing and just fully devoted to being a homemaker and dealing with what's going on with the kids at home, and that her dad acted more as a preacher, constantly giving out short, like, stories and quips for the kids to remember, and he would tell the same stories over and over again so that it was embedded into their memory, and they were supposed to be lessons that made an impact on all of the kids. And they worked with these young children who essentially were experiencing, you could call it like some form of brainwashing, but it was Jim Bob's way of imparting all of the lessons, which he had from his own life, but also from the teachings of Bill Gothard and the IBLP. It's here I want to point out that Jill talks a little bit about Jim Bob's lessons coming from his childhood and the fact that he did not have an ideal upbringing. Jim Bob is the son of an alcoholic father, and there's so much I could say about all of that. I'm a member of Al-Anon, which is kind of a community of people who come together when they've grown up as of children of alcoholics. There's a lot of alcoholism in my family, and many things that we see with Jim Bob, I think it seems to me that it could definitely be influenced by his relationship with his parents, and specifically his father, who didn't really find much success in life as far as we know, who dealt with a lot of issues with addiction and was not very present or much of a leader in Jim Bob's life. So as an aside, I've often wondered if Jim Bob sees a lot of his dad in his firstborn son, Josh, and that his interactions with Josh may be influenced by some psychological thoughts and need to try to go back and save his father, who he could never save before, and Josh is kind of like his chance to do that all over again, because Josh displays a lot of addictive personality traits as well. So there's a lot to talk about, and that's another rabbit hole to head down. But I've often wondered if there isn't some overlap in Jim Bob's mind of these two very important people in his life. He really has strived incredibly hard to try to be different than the father he grew up with. Jill says, back before they were on TV, things were simpler for us Duggars. We put into practice the lessons that mom and dad were teaching us, and we found ways to emulate our parents. And they created a lot of clubs, which I thought were really funny. They had like a What Would Jesus Do club where they would make bracelets that say, what would Jesus do? And it's here that Jill goes into a lot of information about how she wanted to join the boys club, which was headed up by Josh. And this club, interestingly enough, was about the fact that Jim Bob Duggar had told the kids, and kind of centered it on Josh, that there was a gas station down the road from them that was going to start selling pornography. And Josh was very interested in creating a club where they would boycott the gas station, and they would let everyone know that this wasn't the right place to do your shopping as long as they continued to sell porn. At first, Josh completely denied that Jill could join the club because it was boys only. And also, I mean, it comes across to me that Josh didn't care much for Jill and didn't want her involved in many things, until eventually she offered to pay to be part of the club and gave them a few dollars. She describes being in the club as I mean, it's interesting for me because it seems like there's a lot of Josh worship going on in this club. A couple of the brothers were involved and they all met in Josh's room. They would talk about like what they were going to do and their plans. And it seems like Josh had to okay everything. He was definitely in charge. They had a little bit of money and they made a plan of how they were going to boycott the gas station by using tracts, Christian tracts. What stands out the most to me about Jill's telling of this story is how it seems like everybody in this little club was hero worshiping Josh a little bit. She writes, "Okay," Josh said, calling the meeting to order. "So, first order of business is money. John, how much do we have?" $19.59, John says. A warm murmur of approval went around the room, and then they go on to talk about their plan. They come up with a good one, I guess. It's mainly the Christian tracts that they're going to pass out. "Good," said Josh. "My dad says that gas station is still selling PORN, so we can keep encouraging people not to shop there." And with that, it was pickle time. Because apparently Josh, this is also interesting to me too, Josh had come up with his own homemade seasoning salt, supposedly, where he like combined a bunch of different powders together, which sounds like many other combinations that are already out there, and put them on pickles. And Jill says only Josh knew how to make it, so everybody was really excited when he made his pickles, his world famous pickles for them. All right, we're going to take a break here, guys, and the next video coming out will be the ending of chapter 1, in which we talk about the family's introduction to the IVLP. Thank you so much for heading down this rabbit hole with me. Hopefully by this evening we'll have the next video out so we can roll through this book. I've definitely read further. I'm a few chapters in, and I will probably finish the book today. Yeah, there's a lot of fascinating information. Jill is confirming a lot of rumors that we've heard in the past, but also comes out with some new information about Jim Bob Duggar and Josh Duggar's relationship, a lot of the financial things that were going on in the background, and the disparity in the way that all of the children were treated by their father and their interactions with TLC. I'm so glad that you're joining me for this series, and I hope you'll join me again when we head down our next rabbit hole.